In a small suburban town, Edenvale, the Adeyemi family had lived a peaceful life. Daniel worked as a government official while Chioma, his wife, worked as a nurse at the local hospital. Their 3-year-old daughter Zuri was the light of their lives, and Bruno, their brown Alsatian, was more than just a pet. He was a guardian, protector, and loyal friend to the family. Before we dive into this gripping story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you love stories packed with mystery and drama, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. There's so much more coming your way. The morning sun broke through the thin curtains of the Adeyemi household, casting a soft glow over the living room. A quiet breeze rustled the leaves outside, signaling the beginning of another calm day. Inside, Daniel Adeyemi, a government official in his late 30s, sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee. The small clink of his spoon against his cup punctuated the silence. Across from him, Chioma, his wife, was rushing through her morning routine. She pulled her dark hair back into a bun as she checked the time on her phone. "I'll be late for my shift again," she muttered to herself, grabbing her hospital uniform from the chair. Daniel smiled, trying to ease her stress. "It's just a shift. You'll be fine." "But you know how they get," Chioma replied, glancing over her shoulder at their daughter's room. "Zuri's just starting to sleep through the night. I hate leaving her so early." Daniel nodded. He understood. Zuri, their 3-year-old daughter, was the light of their lives. Full of life and energy, her laughter often echoed through the house like a sweet melody. And then there was Bruno, the dog. Bruno wasn't just any pet. He was a part of the family, a loyal, protective guardian for their daughter. As Chioma hurried out the door, she paused at the threshold and turned back. "Bruno," she called, the dog immediately padding into the hallway, his large frame brushing against the doorframe. "Keep an eye on Zuri today, Bruno. Make sure she's safe." Bruno responded with a soft, almost human-like gaze. He gave a low bark, wagging his tail slightly as if to say, "I will." Chioma smiled, her heart lightened by the dog's reassuring presence. "Good boy," she whispered before stepping out. Daniel took a final sip of his coffee, mentally preparing for the day ahead. He stood up and gave Bruno a pat on the head before heading for the door. "Take care of her, buddy." Outside, the day was beautiful. The sun hung high in the sky, casting its warmth on Edenvale, a small town where everyone knew each other's name. Life seemed slow, simple, and peaceful. But that peaceful feeling would be shattered soon. It was nearing mid-morning when the robbers, Mark, David, and Solomon, pulled into the quiet neighborhood. The 3 men were unremarkable, blending in with the everyday commuters and residents who passed by, yet they carried with them a dangerous intent. Their eyes flickered nervously as they surveyed the houses from the beat-up car. "Which one is it?" Mark, the leader of the group, asked, his voice rough and full of anxiety. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, trying to steady himself. David, sitting in the passenger seat, pointed toward the Adeyemi house. "That one. It's a perfect target. No security cameras, no one's home." Solomon, the youngest of the 3, looked around nervously. "You sure about this? We don't know what's inside. Could be more than we bargained for." Mark grunted. "We'll be in and out. Grab whatever we can and get out. No one's going to miss some watches and electronics." The men climbed out of the car, the sound of their footsteps crunching the gravel as they approached the front door. They had planned for this moment, but none of them anticipated the dog that would soon make them regret it. Inside the house, Zuri was still fast asleep, unaware of the danger creeping ever closer. Bruno was sprawled out at the foot of her bed, his sharp eyes trained on the door. He had learned to sleep lightly when it came to his family, especially Zuri. His protective instincts were always on high alert. The sound of the front door creaking open echoed down the hallway. Bruno's ears perked up, his muscles tightening as he stood, the fur on his back standing up. He growled low, a warning. The robbers, wearing masks and gloves, moved quickly through the house. Their heavy steps were masked by the sound of the wind and the muffled hum of the neighborhood. Mark was the first to reach the bedroom door. He turned the knob slowly, trying to keep the noise to a minimum. As the door creaked open, Zuri stirred slightly in her bed. Bruno's growl turned into a fierce bark echoing off the walls. The robbers froze for a moment, taken aback. But before they could react, Bruno lunged at them, teeth bared, his bark now a snarl of warning. The leader of the group, Mark, cursed under his breath and pulled out his gun, aiming it at the dog. "Stay back," he shouted, but Bruno wasn't listening. In a blur of motion, Bruno pounced at him, knocking the gun from his hand. The two struggled briefly on the floor before Mark managed to kick Bruno away. Bruno quickly regained his footing, eyes locked on Zuri. She was awake now, sitting up in bed with a look of confusion on her face. The room was filled with chaos, but her gaze fell on Bruno, the only familiar thing in the midst of the storm. The robbers were losing control. The sounds of struggle grew louder. But it was in the midst of that chaos that the unimaginable happened. A gunshot rang out. The bullet hit Zuri. Everything stopped. Bruno, covered in blood, immediately darted to Zuri's side. His large body shielded her from the worst of the damage. With a frantic, almost desperate look in his eyes, Bruno grabbed the back of Zuri's nightgown with his teeth and began to drag her away from the chaos, toward the living room where people could see her. The next few minutes were a blur of flashing lights, shouts, and the shrill sounds of sirens. When the police arrived, it was clear that the situation had escalated far beyond what anyone had expected. The paramedics worked frantically on Zuri, their attempts at saving her futile. Blood stained the carpet where she had been dragged by Bruno. Daniel and Chioma were contacted immediately. As they rushed to the scene, panic and disbelief filled every inch of their bodies. They could barely process what had happened. Their daughter was dead. And Bruno, the dog they had trusted to protect her, was being blamed for the tragedy. The police, overwhelmed and unsure of what to do, mistakenly assumed that Bruno was the one who had attacked Zuri. "He's the one that killed her," one officer said firmly. "He's the only one here that could have done it." Daniel, frantic, tried to explain. No, Bruno was protecting her. He was trying to save her from the robbers. But the officers were already drawing their weapons, convinced that the dog posed a threat. The decision was made quickly, too quickly. Bruno was shot. As the bullet pierced his side, he whimpered in pain, but his eyes never left Zuri's body. His loyalty to the family had cost him his life. The house was eerily quiet in the wake of the tragedy. The harsh red and blue lights of the police cars flickered in the driveway, casting long shadows across the family's front yard. Daniel and Chioma stood in the living room, their bodies frozen with shock, unable to comprehend the horror unfolding before them. In the corner of the room, the lifeless form of Zuri lay covered with a white sheet, a silent testament to the unspeakable loss. Bruno's body, too, had been taken away, his blood staining the floor where he had tried to protect her. The paramedics, after what seemed like hours, had confirmed that there was nothing more they could do for Zuri. The bullet had been fatal, tearing through her fragile body in a way that no one could have imagined. Yet, the events leading up to her death were still unclear. It was the police's mistaken assumption that Bruno, the dog, had attacked her that would set the stage for the family's long and painful road to justice. Chioma collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands, her body racked with sobs. "But why did this happen?" she cried out, her voice hoarse with grief. "Bruno, he was supposed to protect her. He loved her. He would never hurt her. He was trying to save her." Daniel, his face pale and filled with anguish, stood in the doorway, watching as his wife fell apart. He wanted to comfort her, but he could barely comfort himself. The weight of the situation was unbearable. Their daughter was gone, and the one creature who had given everything to protect her, Bruno, had been killed by the very people who were supposed to be helping them. I can't believe it," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "This is all a mistake. They killed him, Chioma. They killed Bruno. He didn't do anything wrong." The two stood in the living room, haunted by the reality of the loss. But the pain they felt for their daughter was overshadowed by the growing frustration. They needed answers. They needed justice. As the days passed, Daniel and Chioma were left to navigate a world turned upside down. The police investigation into the robbery and the tragic death of Zuri was quickly underway, but things weren't adding up. It became clear that the authorities were scrambling to make sense of the chaos, but they had already made one crucial mistake. They had assumed that Bruno, in his protective instinct, had somehow turned on Zuri. The coroner's report revealed that Zuri had been shot, not mauled or attacked by Bruno. She had been an innocent victim of the robbery gone wrong. The bullets had come from the robbers, not from Bruno's teeth. Still, the officers involved in Bruno's death refused to acknowledge their mistake. They clung to their initial assessment, unwilling to admit that they had killed the family dog, an animal that had been trying to save Zuri, not harm her. The family lawyer, Mrs. Adephilake, was a fierce advocate for justice. She wasted no time in digging into the case, uncovering inconsistencies in the police's handling of the situation. She discovered that the officers had acted hastily, firing upon Bruno without giving him a chance to prove his loyalty to the family. The emotional toll on the Adeyemis was becoming unbearable, but they refused to back down. Every conversation with the police felt like a slap in the face. The officers would talk about their procedures, their protocol, but none of it mattered to the Adeyemis. They didn't care about policies. They cared about their daughter, their dog, and the devastating loss that had torn their lives apart. Daniel and Chioma felt betrayed. How could this happen? How could the system, the one that was supposed to protect them, have failed so miserably? They knew they would need to fight for the truth. But the question remained, would anyone listen? The investigation into the robbery continued to unfold. As more details emerged, it became apparent that the men who had broken into the Adeyemi home were far from ordinary criminals. The three men, Mark, David, and Solomon, had been part of a larger, more organized crime ring operating within the region. But what was even more unsettling was the realization that the death of Zuri wasn't just a random act of violence. It was an accident, a terrible, unfortunate mistake. It turned out that the robbers had been targeting the wrong house altogether. They had received a tip that the Adeyemis were away, but the information was wrong. The robbers had believed the house was empty, but when they broke in, they found Zuri alone with Bruno. The robbers panicked when Bruno attacked, thinking that the dog was the first line of defense. They shot wildly, aiming for the perceived threat, and in doing so, Zuri was caught in the crossfire. As the truth started to surface, the robbers were apprehended, but the emotional damage had already been done. Daniel and Chioma were left to pick up the pieces of their broken family, now confronted by the cruel reality that they had lost everything in a single, devastating moment. The trial of the robbers began, and the Adeyemis attended every session, hoping to find some semblance of closure. The courtroom was tense, as the defense attorneys attempted to paint the robbers as misguided individuals, making excuses for their actions. But the Adeyemis were determined to make their voices heard. They wouldn't let the death of their daughter and the killing of their beloved dog go unnoticed. Through their lawyer, Mrs. Adephilake, they demanded that the police officers involved in Bruno's death be held accountable. The family's fight was no longer just about getting justice for Zuri. It was about making sure that the truth about Bruno's role in saving Zuri was recognized. They would not rest until those responsible for the wrongful shooting of Bruno were held accountable for their actions. The courtroom drama reached its peak when the prosecutor brought in the evidence that had been gathered in the days following the tragedy. The bullet wounds in Zuri's body, the testimony of the medical examiner, and the forensic evidence all pointed to one undeniable fact. Zuri had been killed by the robbers, not by Bruno. The defense had no leg to stand on. But the most emotional moment of the trial came when Daniel and Chioma took the stand. Through their tears, they spoke about the love they had for their daughter and their dog. They described the pain of seeing Bruno's lifeless body, the dog that had tried to save their daughter, shot down in cold blood. Bruno was not a killer, Daniel said, his voice breaking. He was the protector. The true protector. He saved Zuri from the robbers. He did his job. He gave his life for her. The jury deliberated for hours, but in the end, justice was served. The robbers were convicted and sentenced to life in prison, while the police officers involved in Bruno's death were placed under investigation. Though this was not the perfect resolution, it was a step toward healing for the Adeyemis. The emotional scars of that day would never fully heal. The Adeyemis would always carry the weight of their loss. But they also knew that they had fought for what was right. They had fought for Zuri, for Bruno, and for the truth to come to light. In the months that followed, the family moved to a new town, trying to rebuild their lives. They planted a tree in their front yard in memory of Zuri and Bruno, a living tribute to the love and loyalty they had shown. Every year, on the anniversary of that fateful day, they held a memorial for their daughter and their dog, keeping their memories alive. And though the pain never completely faded, the Adeyemis found solace in knowing that Zuri had been loved, protected, and ultimately, that Bruno's sacrifice had not been in vain. Thanks for watching. If you're hooked on gripping stories like this, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling tales. Your support means the world to us. With love and gratitude, I invite you to join our community for more captivating content. Subscribe now for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you.